And for most of us, all we need in a training journal is going into a session. We might write these numbers in, and it might be feeling tired before training or feeling very good before training. It might be slept poorly last night, didn't eat lunch, just something as simple as that at the start. That just sets you up. It's not for today, even though externalizing it today can help. What it's for is it's for 3 weeks' time. When you come into training, you open up your training journal, you're ready to go to that sheet, and you say, oh, geez, I forgot I felt really bad at this session too. Or my sleep wasn't great on this day last week as well. You can start to correlate those things. You can start to notice that, okay, every 3 weeks things really don't feel good for me, or like all of our hormones fluctuate on a monthly basis. So we really need to watch out for these things of like, okay, when it gets to the end of the month, like, or people who work in certain jobs, when it gets to the end of certain periods, things will be getting worse. The first thing about learning how to control that and moderate our mood and moderate our psychology around this is just noting it down and journaling it. I'll show you my training journal later. That will have all of that in it. That's one line. It will take 10 seconds and it's already in your brain because it's already annoying you, you know. Shireen talked to me for ages at the start of the session and now I lost a lot of time. Something as simple as that, right?
It never happens.
Never happens, right? Then at the end of the session, you just have a simple tally up of the session. Got really annoyed, missed all my snatches. If you're like working with a coach like me and Gurf, this might be anger texting to your coach. Missed all the jerks, shouldn't have changed elbow height. You know, something as simple as that. And that's all you want to do. This simple thing of externalizing something as we go into a session and externalizing something as we leave a session is the first step in like starting to control that. And that's the same way where at the far end of this, when we have a really elite performer, we can get an international or a collegiate level swimmer and hand them a stopwatch and they'll go like this. They'll click the stopwatch with their eyes closed, they'll visualize an entire race and they'll click the stopwatch and they'll have swam their exact time they were thinking about swimming. That's the level of mental control you want to get there. You ideally want to be able to close your eyes and imagine you walk into the gym. You'll do everything you do in a whole session and you should be able to click a stopwatch with that same level of control and have the exact same time that you finish training at. Obviously, in weightlifting, it's not as important. Your stroke rate and all that isn't important, but that's the level of mental control you want to get there. And the journal is the first way you get there. It's the building block that everything else comes up. Okay, once you start journaling some of your issues and getting some, not issues, once you start journaling some of your thoughts and journaling some of those mindset things around training, you're suddenly going to, or it mightn't be sudden at all, you might have realized it for your whole life, you're going to start picking up on certain predispositions, certain surpluses or strengths, or certain deficits or weaknesses, right? And these weaknesses might always be, God, at the start of the week, I'm always very, very hyped, and at the end of the week, I'm always really low, and training doesn't go great a lot of the time. And these things are really important. So we can say there's fluctuations, hormones that might affect this, fluctuations in outside world logistics that might help this or hurt this. Just noticing them is really, really important, and knowing when you're going to be at a lower point is important, because particularly if you're writing your own programs, but if you have some amount of control over your own training, and you know that Thursdays are terrible for me and I never feel good on Thursdays, then this is something you immediately say, okay, I'll do that shit power session on a Thursday, or I'll do all my bodybuilding on Thursday when I'm not really mentally there. And instead, that Tuesday morning session or that Saturday morning session is when I'm actually going to be at my best place to hit some big numbers. This is obviously more and more important. Again, we go into competitions, we start understanding, okay, usually more than 2 days off, I start to drop off and I don't feel great, or if I just keep training for 5 days in a row, my mood kind of drops down. So that's very important. Some of the things you're going to notice, and this is nothing to do with you, it's every group of weightlifters in the world, you'll have 2 or 3 traits that are very, very prominent. So almost all weightlifters, when we do studies and look at predisposition in weightlifters, neuroticism is incredibly high. Neuroticism tends to hold us back a huge amount in our training. And neuroticism comes in a host of roles, right? But it's everything from feeling the want or need to squat every day, or press every day, or train every day, the whole way through to, yeah.
But don't actually know what neuroticism is.
So neuroticism is an over-analysis of things that are going on, and then that directly affecting your mood. So if Gerf is being neurotic about his front rack, and he spends 15 minutes doing front rack exercises instead of doing 5 minutes, and it being okay, and then me getting into it. So it's something that's going to affect my mood through like over analysis. You might hear it called like paralysis for analysis or something along those lines. That's incredibly, we have two different, in psychology there's your state of emotion and then there's your trait of emotion. Traits are things that are with us our entire lives. States are things that our direct environment affects us in. Weightlifters on a whole will have incredibly high traits of neuroticism. It's just the group of people we are. If we were with a sales team, we have incredibly high traits of different things. If you were with a rugby team, we incredibly high traits of different things. It's just the cross we're born to bear, I'm afraid. Most of the time, we'll be highly analytical. That's why we go into a sport that's very, very objective, and we like the numbers and we like the technique and working on these different things. Now, it's important to note that this is not completely a negative thing. This is what allows you to be analytical of your technique. It's what allows you to be able to focus on something. A lot of athletes, if you brought them in, tell them to do 10 singles at a certain weight, they'd be like, this is the shittest sport in the world. Why am I here, you know? I hate doing this. Why it's the same weight? Why do I have to lift it again? I just did that. Whereas we enjoy going and hitting the weight, changing something, hitting the weight, hitting the weight. Dara says it's great. No, that's what allows us to be successful. We have to look out for the pitfalls that come along with it. If you're someone, I know we were talking earlier yesterday, like somebody repeating a week constantly and that not necessarily being a great thing, classic case of neuroticism. I've completed a week of training in the program. It didn't go phenomenally well, but I'm going to rerun it. If you're rerunning weeks, every week you rerun is just lost, you know. And there's momentum in weightlifting is a massive thing. When we talk about momentum, momentum is doing something this week that you weren't able to do or you didn't do last week. Anytime we repeat something, anytime we don't move on to the next level of progression, now it's incredibly important at certain stages, but anytime we don't push on due to neuroticism, it's going to be a negative thing. So it's good if you, like myself and Gerf, will audit ourselves quite regularly and being like, do I really need to do this, or am I just lying to myself? Like, and that's the kind of conversation you, ideally if you have something like that, like a training partner or a coach, it's really handy. But you can also have that chat with yourself of like, I'm doing something that isn't quite normal, or I'm doing something that other people around me aren't doing. Do I think I need to do this? And you just have to check yourself every so often with that. We all live within our own bubble, our own echo chamber of my weightlifting. Sometimes you just have to pull out and have a look and see, are you being slightly too neurotic with it? Okay, next thing, and if you look at states or traits that are positive for weightlifters, high levels of confidence are really positive, right? So when we chatted earlier about self-preservation and lads being mental and girls not being as mental, having high levels of confidence is really important. And it's really important that loads of people don't have a trait of being very confident. A lot of us won't walk around the place like this all the time with our chest puffed out and being really confident, particularly when it comes to our lifts. You might be quite confident because you might fail a certain weight a number of times. You might have not progressed for a number of months. With the confidence stuff and the self-efficacy stuff, so self-efficacy is how we rate our own effectiveness at a lift. So if I'm saying, geez, I'm definitely going to miss 140, that's a very low level of self-efficacy. It's really important to know that you can manipulate that and you have control over that. Like, we talk to ourselves more than we talk to anyone else, and most of the time if I come up to someone and say you need to put a small bit more weight on there, or you can do 2 extra sets, or in a month's time when you go to this competition I think you're going to hit X, Y and Z, you're controlling how you hear that. You're controlling, I'm not going to be able to hit this, or geez, I really don't think that's possible. I've been stuck at this weight for the last 2 years, you know. And all of that internal dialogue is so important. The bad thing is, as coaches or as like sports psychs, we don't hear the internal dialogue. We just hear what the external dialogue is. And a lot of the time the external dialogue is a lie where someone's like, I'm confident I'm going to hit it. And you might see it in their face, but it's really important that you control that. You are the person who talks to yourself in your own head. So when we're trying to be more confident, or if there's weight you've missed 20 times over 5 different sessions, it's incredibly difficult to be confident. It's incredibly difficult to lie to yourself and say, I'm definitely going to make this. That's why a lot of athletes are absolutely mental. When you talk to them, you say, Jesus Christ, there's something wrong with you. Like, how do you think like that? That's what it takes. And I'm not saying you need to go out there and be like that, because most of us won't have that trait. But what you definitely need to do is just control the dialogue around training. In the same way where at the start, you might have allowed yourself to stay in the gym for ages or do really dumb things when you were training, and you don't do those dumb things anymore, or hopefully we don't. You need to do the same thing with the talk. You can, I don't care about the dialogue about other things in your life, but about snatches, clean and jerks, squats, pulls and presses, I want you to be really, really positive. Now, if I pick up my phone and it's me failing a lift 10 times, I'm not going to say, geez, that's great, isn't it? But when I'm preparing myself for a session, or preparing myself for a lift, or planning out sessions and cycles and blocks of training, I need to be positive. And like, we're our own worst enemy. We hate ourselves so much because you haven't hit that lift yet. You really do need to control that rhetoric that's going on in your head. And it doesn't have to be hippy dippy of everything's great, I love this is great now. No, I know I failed 20 lifts last week. That's not a bad thing. But you do just in your own head when you're walking up to a barbell, or when you're walking into the gym to go to a session, or into an arena to go for a competition, that must be a positive conversation you're having with yourself all the time. If you're not having a positive conversation, you catch that happening, there's something you can do called framing. Framing in your pre-performance routine is really important. We won't get into it right now, but there is some nice things that will just pull you out of that bubble for a sec. Hopefully change how you're viewing that situation you're in, and bring back that more positive conversation again. Okay, the last thing we tend to do as weightlifters, we look at, and these are papers you can go look at, psychological traits, states and predispositions of weightlifters is a very good one. When you look at weightlifters, we tend to be very open to change and alteration of our current plan. So a lot of the time what you'll see, and people might call it like squirrel programming, where you take a bit of this, take a bit of this, and I'll take a bit of this, or else we won't adhere to something for long enough. And this is exercise intervention in general. People don't tend to adhere to them for long enough, but there's nothing wrong with running a cycle. Like, you could buy a 4-week cycle and run it 20 times. As long as you're progressing through each of those 20 times, that's a very, very good thing. What happens when we don't start adhering to things is it becomes easier to shift and pivot every time we shift and pivot. Like, every time you make a decision of, oh, I'm going to change how I do this, or I'm going to change the program I'm on, or I'm going to take a week and just alter my plan slightly, every time I do that, it becomes easier. It's like if a child only drinks water from the age of 0 years old, and they drink nothing else but water, it's very difficult for that child to walk into a petrol station and then buy a can of Coke Zero, you know? Whereas if you go for a different thing every day, that sudden decision to go for a different thing is very, very easy. You just pick up a different can. So this thing of changing programs, changing plans, changing time scales of goals is something we really want to get away from. And it is like, all athletes have it because we're constantly pushing for something better. Like, you're all spending a long weekend listening to Irish lads talking about weightlifting and training with people you've never met before. Like, you obviously want to get way, way better. And it's natural that we're always looking for a better mousetrap. We're always looking for a better solution to the problems we have currently. But adhering to training for a long period of time is so, so important. You need to stay in there. We're constantly talking about motor patterns and stuff this weekend. You need to stay there. It's the same thing with your progressions and how long we spend doing certain progressions. It's really, really important. And as somebody who sells training programs, it's not an intelligent thing for me to say, but you can stick on program for a long, long time. You know, you want to understand how well your body will adapt to this. You want to know, like we were talking about this back squat program earlier today. I used that squat program 3 times last year, and I know for a fact how I'll feel during each of those sessions. I know what I need to do during certain weeks. I know what I'll need to do after certain sessions because it's so consistently used. I've run it 6 or 8 times out at this point. That's the kind of familiarity you need with yourself. It's not necessarily that I'm going to run a period of training now, then after it I must immediately change on to something else. Like, we get people running the beginner program constantly. There's email us, new numbers, run it again. Email us, new numbers, run it again. And it's really effective. You get to understand a lot more about yourself than you would have initially if you just went from program A to program B to program A to program C and just keep hopping around, you know. like as athletes, everyone wants to change, everyone wants new shoes, everyone wants new belts, everyone wants new pants. Great for the industry of people who sell things in weightlifting, but we really want, like you want to walk into a gym and see straps that are worn down and have been used for years, and you know for a fact when you go to put those straps around the bar, you have the exact same feeling every time. If we change things constantly, it's going to take us a lot more time to really dive into to like a level of mastery with that. Okay, moving on from this, does anyone have any questions about those? Realise I've talked for 20 minutes without stopping with 25 minutes. Does anyone have any questions there? Or can anyone like relate to certain things there of like changing things up or constantly looking for the better program is like, it's always something we do. So just be
like on the anomaly, I feel like change.
okay.
Like the strap example, I've only had one pair of straps.
Perfect.
Like, in my weightlifting and all life.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I don't like new programs. Like, I just
Perfect.
like I took Zach's template program from his seminar in 2017 and ran it ad nauseum until I got the
Yeah.
Like, so,
And in those cases, like when something pops up, you do need to change
yeah,
or
so I was
alter
like,
your
okay,
program.
like what do I do now? I've been running the same program for like a year and a bit.
last 3 years.
What's that?
I've been wearing these shorts for the last 3 years.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But like,
No, that's exactly what you want. You want
when I
consistency.
get bigger, because it's starting to feel a bit like I'll probably just get the next size up.
Yeah.
I had the size down before.
No, that like it's so important to be as consistent as possible with everything around your training, and you will like the dividends will come from it. You will benefit from it.
So with the journaling, going back to the
Yeah.
journaling, so I've been journaling kind of once a week since I started
Yeah.
weightlifting. Would you recommend like
Every session.
really?
Yeah.
Do you actually do that?
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm not asking for
My
proof.
brag-
I'm just saying like do you do
no,
it?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And like depending on
Just a few notes, like.
few notes, so 2 lines is perfect. Like mine, because I'm learning jiu-jitsu, it's all sketches. So I showed you yesterday, like it's different. It's not writing out letter or numbers I hit and how those feel, but like for me, it's more a thing of motor pattern recognition and being able to learn that better, and just sketching those out makes so much sense in my head. If you looked at it, it'd be like, what the fuck is happening here?
Huge,
But this makes so much sense to me. When I'm training really hard, like this time last year for squatting and running, that journal was like vomiting on a page every single day. And every time I finished a session, everything went into that.
So how often do you look back at it?
Every time I opened it. So it like if
So
I
like I said, I've been doing it once a week since I started weightlifting. I haven't read any of these things.
you haven't got back to
No,
it.
I haven't gone back.
Oh yeah, so like if I'm on the train or if I'm like waiting to go into training, I'll just be like leafing through it just as like entertainment value. But then when you audit your training, so when you finish a block like every 4, 6, 8 weeks, I'd go back through it and I'd see like I don't know do many of you audit your training as it is, but I'd be going back through and like, okay, no, this session was good, this session was bad, this week was good, this week was bad. I'd go back through the journal then and look at that information. Have you found that since you started writing things out?
It was more of like to me it was just a bit therapeutic, like, than anything else. I can't say that I've got many notes in it that would help me with figuring out, oh, my clean got better because of this, or I haven't really got much of that. It's more about had a good session, feel like I've improved my overhead position, not why, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Just like kind of almost therapeutic, just to kind
But
of.
they're the notes I'm talking about, you know.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be, we have so much the analytical stuff, and particularly if you're working with like a coach or you're on a certain program, the analytics and the numbers are all there. It's those things are really important.
Yeah.
And that externalizing it also takes it out of your head.
Yeah, I kind of send it to my coach every week. So.
That's perfect. Yeah. Because like the externalizing of something, so say if you have a bad session, like I missed all my snatches. When you externalize something, it just allows us to move it out of our conscious mind an awful lot easier. When we don't externalize something, I'm thinking about it all the time, and it just sits there for an awful lot longer. Just writing it out or texting it to your coach or something like that can be really, really helpful. Does anyone have any more questions? No?
I was just gonna say that like I think one of the issues I have is that like because I'm kind of on a remote coaching with my coach, so I film all my videos and I would like kind of constantly look at them like and analyze like kind of, sometimes I overanalyze like after like basically after I lift, and every time I rest, I sit down and rest, I would just look through it, and sometimes it might be, I might be looking at it for too long and thinking too much.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that there's positives to that we're going to talk about, right? Mirror neurons and action observations makes a big difference. But if you do find that like that negative talk in your head is going on a small bit longer,
it's not really negative thought. It's more like I'm thinking, oh, what I need to change like all the time. It has helped a lot, like to figure out what was wrong with my like technique. But sometimes it's just like I need to change too many things like, in the session. So.
And that's the thing of like prioritization as well. Like the Aaron, the animal kid, the Australian lifter, thought, like we said this yesterday, talks about having one cue for 6 months. He doesn't change the cue for 6 months. Like, I think 6 months is a long time. But what I really like about that is like prioritization of one thing over the others. So if you are looking back over the videos, you're finding you're reviewing your videos a lot, try and really just notice one thing. So if it's like knees coming in onto the fish, where your elbows being at a certain height for your jerk or your front squat, try and focus on those over the other things rather than like, I can look at a video of anyone snatch and pick out 10 things they could do better, and they could be a great snatch that they don't really have to change anything. But if you go looking for those issues constantly, you constantly have issues there. So just the prioritization of like, no, this is the one thing I need to work on, and coach that I need to work on, so I'm going to just stick to that. I'll keep moving forward with that and just being very, very kind of prioritized with those cues.
Okay.
Sweet. Okay, next thing I want to talk about, we want some other stuff then, is like journaling, how it's very, very useful. One thing that's probably the most useful for most amateur athletes is framing. So I'm not sure if you've used framing before or listened to anything about framing before. Framing is basically in the same way where putting a frame around this whiteboard would change how you view the whiteboard. Framing is just a simple mental exercise that allows you to shift your perception of the situation you're currently in. So the case we could use for this is like someone's on a sinking boat and they do a framing exercise and they say, oh great, I get to go swimming, not that I'm going to drown instantly, or I'm in a burning house and be like, oh thank God it's not cold, it's warm now. Obviously we don't need to do that, the situation isn't quite as dire when we're going training, but most of us, if you're going from just having coach classes, or you're coming from just having gone to work or come home from work, or you've been in like nice cozy house and now you have to go out to your garage or your shed and go training, framing can be really, really useful for that, because most of the time we're coming into a training environment, even if you're excited, it's not the most comfortable environment to be coming into. Like even physiologically, it tends to be loud, tends to be cold, tends to be at the start or the end of our day, and rarely is it in the middle of our day when we feel in the best kind of shape to train. What framing is for most people is something between 3 and 5 minutes long, and all I like, when people start off, I like them to write it down, just 3 things. And there are 3 positive things. It comes down to that controlling that rhetoric that's going on the whole time, a shift more towards the positive side, but just 3 reasons you're happy to be there, or 3 positive things about today. And these can be these can be off the wall. These can be like, I have a Mars bar in my gear bag, and once I finish training, I'm going to eat the Mars bar. And then the second thing might be like, I got new shoes. I wear my new shoes and I've been wearing them for ages. And the last thing might be, I hate this set of squats, but once I do it, I don't have to do it again for a week. And you can be as imaginative with this as possible. You can change this up as much as you want or as little as you want. When people start, I like them to write it down. I like them to just have a post-it note. Most of the framing exercise I get people to do are when they're sitting in their car, usually outside the gym or outside wherever they're training. They write down the 3 things with a post-it note. Put a timer on your phone for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, not much more than that. And then all you do for those 3 or 5 minutes is think about those 3 things over and over again. I like to go point A, point B, point C, point A, B, C, and I'll just keep thinking about them. At the start, it's as simple as writing the 3 things out. You can just read them in your head to yourself until the alarm goes off. Now that gets quite boring, but it will get you down that road of framing and into that kind of positive mindset. As you get better at it, or as you try it a couple of times, you can suddenly start to see like, oh yeah, I do hate this set of squats, but I won't have to do it again for a week, Then you're thinking, oh, but I do get the front squat on Fridays, and I love front squatting on Fridays. Or,
Whatever.
What's that?
I said no, whenever.
Yeah. But that's what you're kind of trying to do, you know. Like, no matter how bad the situation is, you can always find something positive about it. And it's literally 3 minutes. You'll spend longer chatting to the person getting the foam roller off the wall than you will sitting in your car for that extra 3 minutes and just preparing yourself to do it. Now, there are certain things with framing that you don't really want to air into. So people oftentimes will start framing when they're like in the car on the way to where they're training, or as they're eating food and preparing to train. I like for it to be an isolated incident. I like for you to be in a specific place doing nothing else. I also don't like there to be any sort of like stimulation going on. So any kind of music or anything that gets you hyped up, or even drinking pre-workout and stuff like that. I prefer for it to be just pretty simple. It's just 3 minutes. And then obviously to be as insular as possible when you're doing it. So ideally don't do it in the changing room when there's other people kind of coming in and out and going to be distracting you. Like the car works great. Out for a walk or as you walk to the gym works great for it. But you want to be somewhat pulled away from your current situation when you're doing these. These work really, really well. We've loads of athletes journaling and framing, and it does work quite well just to control that mindset. Perfect. Is it over there? I'm over there. Is that correct? Oh yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on that? No?
Is that like, would you say it's part of the skill acquisition process, or would you feel like people that have further down the road in skill acquisition are able to do this easier? Because I feel like in other sports, as it comes down with arousal, I feel like I'm able to do things like that easier because I'm further down the road.
Yeah. Well,
those skills.
Definitely. So directly related to skill acquisition, probably not. But there's something else going on there, right? So weightlifting is very, very cognitively demanding. And oftentimes when we're weightlifting, like you're not concentrating on anything else, or where you see it as well is like, if you're distracted by something you're lifting will usually go to shit. Like if you're really stressed about something. In other sports like running or even powerlifting to an extent, the cognitive demand isn't anywhere near as high. Whereas here you really have to concentrate, particularly in those first stage 1 and stage 2 of learning, like declarative and associative. In those stages, it's very cognitively demanding because you really have to think about it. And it's probably that, not necessarily that weightlifting is more difficult, but just if you're further down the line with learning something, like if you play football or cricket or whatever, you know, like you're probably well able to get into that mindset because it doesn't have the same kind of load that weightlifting would have. It's a good segue into like how we kind of learn stuff. And just as I mentioned that, like 3 stages of learning are pretty simple. You might have heard it in a Sika video or heard me talk about it before. Your first stage of learning is fully declarative stage of learning, and we've even experienced it this weekend where we get somebody to declare something as they're going through it. You know, I'm going to keep my elbows high. I'm going to keep my elbows high. I'm going to keep my elbows high every time they're thinking about it. And a lot of us we think like, oh, I'm a master now. It's fully autonomic. I don't think about anything. Garth is a master of weightlifting technique. He does it very, very well. Yet sometimes he'll come back to an associative or declarative stage in a certain element of the movement. If he's changing his technique, or if he's really trying to push something harder, you'll have to pull back from that autonomic stage. So stage 1 is declarative. So like as you learn to drive a car, you're driving and you see the revs come up and you say, okay, now I'm going to change gear. I'm going to press the clutch. I'm going to change gear, leave the clutch out and accelerate. And declare each of those motions, right? So like first pull, squeeze back. Second pull, be patient. Third pull, I'm pulling my elbows high. Then I drop under the bar, you know. We see people moving quite slowly. It can be quite clunky. We're thinking about each stage in between, right? That's declarative. Associative is the revs are going up in the car. I see the revs going up. I clutch, change gear, and leave out the clutch. And I don't really declare each stage. All I see is the revs going up, and I say, okay, I must change gear. And I change gear. And then autonomic, which for most of us who've driven for a long time, driving's fully autonomic to a dangerous point where you won't remember the last hour of driving if you're on the same road. But driving is how many gear changes do you make between here and your house? You wouldn't think about any of it, you know? You're just driving down the road, changing gear, answering your phone, eating breakfast cereal, you know? You don't think about any of that. And that's when you're learning things, the cognitive load of somebody who's autonomic is so different to somebody who's declarative. Like we'll have, and I'm sure you'll have it here as well, weightlifting sessions if they're an hour long. You get people who are destroyed and like so mentally tired after it. They've been thinking so hard about all the movements. They might have been snatching 10 kilos. Like
I was yesterday though.
yeah,
I didn't necessarily go heavy yesterday, but I was asleep at 8:30.
yeah, you didn't go heavy on anything, you know.
Yeah.
Like you've trained much harder at different points. You had a lot of stuff to do. We did loads of reps.
Yeah.
But like it's that cognitive load makes such a difference, and that's why the framing for weightlifting probably more challenging, but it's probably more necessary than it will be in another setting.
I think I keep myself too much in that second and first stage.
Yeah,
Never let just switch off.
yeah, definitely. Loads of people do.
Yeah.
Like I wrote my undergraduate thesis on pre-performance routines and weightlifters, and it was only international weightlifters who had competed in the last number of years for me. So like semi-structured interviews, then did coding of that, and then did a statistical analysis. And that thing of like international athletes, loads of them are still in an associative stage.
Right.
They still do that chunking of information. But the interesting thing is it's fluid, you know. Like they can be fully autonomic with their stance, and then they'll change something with their jerk in the last few years, and then they've gone back to associative with the jerk. You want to be as autonomic as possible. Like the funny thing from that study is when I was writing it up and when I was going through everything, I was like, what do you think about it? And he was like, nothing. And I was like, come on, I'm doing a fucking thesis on it. What do you think about it? Nothing. Red, anger, speed. That's it. You know? Loads of them were like that. What do you think about when you walk up to bar? Nothing. Ask Gabriel, what do you think about it? Nothing. Maybe I'll think about a lift that was good as I'm walking up to it. So I'll think about another snatch or clean and jerk in the past that's been good. You'll think about that feeling of it being fast or being strong or being good. But most of the time, oh no!
Whose dog's this?
It's
Oh, right. Stray dog across the street.
That's actually the one.
Seems slightly easy on the difference between on exactly what associative is.
Yeah.
Depending on what it is. I guess.
So declarative and associative and autonomic.
Yeah.
Associative is like the better word for that is like chunky of information. So I'll give you an example and then I'll explain it a bit more. When we get people into the gym who've done different sports, they'll tend to, or like certain sports will tend to pick up on things very well, right? You get a thrower in, they'll tend to get that hip extension really well. It's not the fact that they'd have done powerlifting or anything before, but it's because they're used to moving in a certain direction and they can associate what I'm trying to tell them to do with a feeling they've had before. So it'd be like, if I say to someone, oh, it's like the jerk, dip and drive is like dip down and you jump straight up in the air as if you're jumping up to catch a ball. Everyone has jumped up to catch a ball or had that feeling, you know, and you associate that feeling of, okay, this is what a normal jump feels like. It's the exact same what I want you to do with your jerk.
Right.
So people have that association thing.
So would that include like me going, I want to snatch the snatch to feel like the last one. Is that
Exactly. Yeah. Same thing. The other thing associative deals with, and like the second aspect of it is, you associate different aspects of the movement with each other, right? So, say in your setup, as you're getting tight on the floor, if you feel the weight in the center of your foot, you're associating that with your quads tightening up. Or as the barbell passes your knees, you associate the barbell passing your knees with you needing to go faster. So rather than it being this kind of clunky thing of I'm pulling off the ground, I'm moving my knees back. Now my knees are back. Now I need to go faster into my second pull. When you have more experienced and more skilled movers, they associate certain things. So rather than it being a scheme of 8 or 9 or 10 things going on at once, you now have 3 things that happen. Knees back off the floor, fast in the second pull, pull myself under the bar. Do you get what I mean by that? What was 12 things now becomes 3 things. And just the cognitive load is a small bit lower.
Can it be like both stages at the same time?
100%. Yeah.
Like that's what I'm thinking about. Like for my dip, I try to like have my arch on my
Yeah.
pelvic, and then like I try to like think of that feeling of like getting an arch and
Yeah.
like things like that.
So absolutely, and it's that's why I'm saying it's more of a spectrum than these 3 different stages, you know, because what'll happen is the first few times you do it, you'll think, I'm arching my back, I'm gonna keep my hips back, everything is gonna go on. As you get a couple of weeks in, a couple of sessions in, you'll probably just think, okay, I have that feeling of tightness, I can go in. And then 3 months, 6 months, 8 months in, you'll just stand up out of the clean, your back will be arched and you won't have thought about it. And that's just an association or chunking together of, as I stand up out of the clean and I address the bar, or I readdress the bar, I now don't have to think about tightening my back because my back will have already tightened up. So it's that mixing of conscious and subconscious. Like, fully subconscious thought would be autonomic all the way at the other end. Fully conscious thought is all the way at this end where I literally have to do everything step by step.
Right, because if you had someone who never cleaned just before, they'd have like a list of a million things you need
100%.
them to focus on. But then as you get experience, the end goal is all those things you need to do is just also conscious.
Yeah, like Garfield says, red or anger. I was saying in my my final year project, when I asked you what to think about in your pre-performance routine, you're like, nothing.
Yeah.
And I was like, Garf, come on. He's like, nothing. But that's what you get to when you get to an autonomic stage. Now, there's still points we're talking about that being fluid of going back across the spectrum of like, you need to change something, and now suddenly I'm just 2 steps down, and I will declare something, or Garf will make a change, he will declare something of a change he's going to make. And after a certain length of time, like we were saying about your arch and your lower back, after a certain length of time, that now becomes just automatic and it will happen.
So sorry, it's this kind of like when if I had a particular accessory or partial where my coach says you're using this to focus on X. So let's say I'm doing a block snatch because you want me to sort out my third pull because I don't have one.
Yeah.
And doing enough when you're doing that, that's encouraging because you're cutting everything out. And then that allows that to move down the chain when you do the full movement.
So there's some other stuff going on there as well, right? Because you're getting the physical development, you're really focusing on physical development there. You're getting some different skill acquisition happening, but that is what's happening. Because then that allows you to associate what you're feeling here and doing here with the full snatch. It's like somebody having a high hang snatch that's 110% of their 1 rep max. They can go back then to the end of their snatch, and as they go to hit a PV, they'll associate that needing of pulling themselves underneath the bar with what they need to do here.
Like when I drop snatch, I think way more about my feet position than most of the other times.
Yeah, because it's
right now because you're sort of trying to change everything.
But that's this is the perfect case because it's all you have to think about.
Yeah,
you just drop under. You have 18 things to think about in a normal snatch.
So see, within a session you have different stages. So if
Absolutely.
you go for a heavy single, you just want to be lift.
Absolutely, yeah. And as well, if you're doing 10 doubles at 70%, it should be where you're thinking about things.
Yeah.
You're trying to fix things. But if you're a BWL nationals, you're going out to hit your second attempt in the snatch, you can't be fixing anything then.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I'm saying about the spectrum and needing to be able to pull that needle up into red. That's the same thing, like those states of arousal, at very high states of arousal, we have nothing happening.
Yeah.
There's no ability to change technique, there's no ability to change any motor pattern. Very low levels of arousal we can do. You can write a novel as you're training, you know. Like if you're sitting on a exercise bike, you're still exercising, moving your legs. But you could have a full-on conversation. Like I could give this lecture sitting on an exercise bike, whereas you'd be hard pressed to have a conversation with someone doing a snatch triple.
Yeah.
Perfect. Any questions?
Is there any value in like knowing that feels good? You know when you're like, I'm not sure how sort of right away this is, but you know if you like you've hit a conversion and as soon as it's left your boot, you're like that's it. I don't even need to.
Yeah.
I don't even need to look. Is there any value of that in waiting? Or
There's
is
a
it just
danger in that.
you like I've seen like Mezzo screaming at the bottom and then he misses it.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Is that you
See,
don't want to
there's-
get in that sort of state?
There's a big danger with that, and it came up a few times here, right? Where with what a lot of your clean technique was, where we made a lot of contact on our quads. A lot of contact on our quads feels phenomenal, right? So those contact on the quads means the bar travels up on its own, and I don't really pull afterwards. Where if I make just the slightest brush, I have a feeling of weight in my hands the whole time, and it feels very heavy, right? technically that is far superior to the banging off the quads, but banging off the quads feels class. About every time Wes Kitts does a clean, it feels really good because it really flies up off his quads. And then we get into that paradox of like, that one felt great.
It wasn't great.
That one felt terrible, yeah, but that one was actually terrible, you know. So, like, the other thing in training, in a more macro cycle than that, is like, although training might feel terrible, a lot of the time you have to go and get the training done. And like, if you're in 8 weeks of a squat cycle and it's feeling really difficult, and it feels like your squats are getting slower, your squats should feel slower. Your lifts should feel slower. If in a classic program, right, we start with high volume. So volume's up here and volume will do that. And then intensity or the weight on the bar starts down here and it will do that. So up here you're doing 3x10 and it's 50%. Up here you're doing 75% and it's 5x5 and it's 75%. And up here you're doing 100% and it's 1x1. Do you get what I mean by that? Like, you start off, this is week 1, this is week 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Around here, you should feel terrible. Around here, you should feel quite bad. It'll feel bad here if you have bad work capacity, but it won't be that hard, like the weights aren't hard. Around here, it'll start to taper off. Around here, it'll start to taper off. And then by the time you finish your peak and a taper for a week or 10 days, you should feel great. You should feel positive to pick up weights. If we really pay attention to how we feel in training and like how good everything lifts, this 3 or 4 week period in the middle, when volume is still quite high and the intensity is starting to build, that period you're going to feel terrible. And you should feel bad. 5 weeks out from a powerlifting competition, you should never ever want to feel a barbell in your hands again. You should be crying walking to the gym. And like, if you've got an athlete who's incredibly psychologically motivated, really wants to get after it, they'll keep pushing through, that'll be great. That's where you kind of have to gauge an athlete. You can't bury everyone. Like, you can't bury everyone and make everything feel terrible, even though that might be great. It's what the Bulgarians did, but only a certain amount of people will get through that. So like, that's why I say don't really use feeling as a gauge of how anything is going. Yeah. It's really valuable. It's really valuable to document all that and put it in your journal and externalize it. And externalizing it will help you deal with these few weeks. But the feeling of things feeling good, particularly in weightlifting, a conversion is very different because there's no physical demand at all.
Yeah.
Like this, your physical demand for an entire rugby season of kicking is this. You don't have to train your legs to be stronger. You don't have to train your run up to be faster. It's just a skill, and it's not a fully closed skill, but it's quite closed. You know, it changes your physical demand of where you are on the field, but most of the time you're strong enough to do it. It's just the actual carrying out of it.
So like, what's the biggest foot you have? Yeah, that doesn't apply to weightlifting, like.
Yeah,
Or
especially
touching the
because
bar.
this is a skill under physical.
Yeah, it's a physical thing, and our physical capital is always being used. We only have a certain amount of physical.
Just like doing a snatch with like no weight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Like that.
If you use the snatch and the sport was a laser pointer on your hand,
Yeah.
pointing at a perfect bar path, that's what it would be like.
Interesting, slight tangent, but like cognitive loading.
Yeah.
And presumably, like, whilst you're using this cognitive stuff to try to learn mental skills.
Yeah.
Does this take from the same, like I heard you say before, that like, for example, stress will fall from the same bucket where it's
Yeah.
makes you better at weightlifting? Do you think that this falls from the same load as, you know, if you were studying mental load, like weightlifting?
100%.
Because
When people are doing finals, I just don't give them program.
it's just interesting because, for example, well, I was asking myself a bit earlier when you were saying like you should do like footwork in between when you're like working at your desk and stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm going to categorically say, well, right now I am not going to do that because it breaks up my mental capacity on my
Yeah.
which I can't. I'm just going to say that it was going to make me a worse athlete, but
Yeah.
it will make me worse at writing.
Yeah.
I think for quantum physics that's fair enough.
Huh?
I think for quantum physics, I think it's fair.
It's just interesting because I like that. I'm just curious whether like each is interfering with the other.
Absolutely.
Because I want to think about weightlifting, and sometimes I have to like stop myself.
But you'd be a better physicist. You did nothing. And you'd like, obviously you need to relax and have.
That's not actually, I don't think that's true, but like, if I did nothing but, I did try doing nothing but physics, and I can tell you later how that went.
Yeah.
Which is why I spent too much time weightlifting.
No, but I was saying like, it definitely, like, those things all draw from the same,
Oh god.
block,
That's true.
you know? You're not, all you do, and this comes down to like your planning of your year, and we'll be doing a programming lecture and how to program for yourself and how to plan out your years and pick competitions and stuff. But in the planning of your year and your training, you should say like, this month's gonna be terrible for me because I've loads of stuff on. Like if we've accountants, there's certain months where they basically may not be training, you know, because like it's not just that they're working late every day, but it's the stress level is so high, and particularly for weightlifting, like it's different. As I was saying with running and stuff, like the cognitive load isn't as high. The load on the body, like physical load, is incredibly high. The cognitive load isn't. And when you're trying to learn, particularly, that makes a massive difference.
When I was competing in August last year, like I was just thinking about, like all the time, awake at night thinking about weightlifting, and it shouldn't have been awake, but like the stress, and it definitely did not do my work any good. And then I was fine. I was there saying like, okay, like I can do this for this brief period.
Yeah.
This week coming up to the competition, and it's like this is why I can't go intense too much because my work will be shite.
Since I started jiu-jitsu, if I'm walking down the street and I see someone walking towards me, I think about double leg kicks. All the time. To a dangerous degree.
Double leg kick. They allow us though.
Yeah.
No, we're not allowed in judo, so that's why it's scary.
Oh, it's the go-to.
Yeah.
Actually, about the cognitive load, right? Like, I personally feel that like when I'm thinking a lot about weightlifting, my work kind of like I get more excited.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like an opposite effect where
So
when I'm thinking a lot, I actually like makes me think more and makes me more excited.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what that is.
Balance, that's fine
Yeah.
for me. This isn't me saying that they're like killing each other, but I couldn't do thinking about like all the time, even the footwork. It's
Yeah.
like, it makes my work better.
The other thing is it's an alteration in mood, you know, and it like mood and cognitive arousal are very highly linked. They're the same thing, just slightly different outcomes. You see them in different ways. But if you're really mentally stimulated to do something, like if you come across somebody who's just picked up a new hobby and all they want to talk about is a new hobby, you know, it's really mentally stimulating and it's really good for your work then because of that. It's good for everything. It's good for how friendly you are with your friends or like how much you want to hang out with your partner. Like everything is positive because of that. The thing where I started off this is like we just want to make sure that weightlifting, particularly if we want to be good competitively in weightlifting, we need to make sure weightlifting isn't the only source of that we have. And like it's important to look for other things to make sure we have other aspects of like if you can't train because you're injured or because of time restrictions or whatever it is, that's not the only thing, because we don't want to, like, injuries happen rarely in weightlifting compared to other sports, but they're still quite common. They're common in every sport. You don't want to have a negative affect on your mood because we're injured and can't go weightlifting anymore. Like I know plenty of people, if they can't train, and Gareth knows them too, if they can't train, they get in a terrible mood. You know, you really don't want to be like that.
Like, because I would say I am 100% like that. I've been
Yeah.
like that all my life.
Yeah.
When you replace weightlifting with something else, like when I was playing rugby growing up,
Yeah.
I hated summertime because there was no rugby, so I was miserable in summertime. Everyone's out there, yeah, sun is shining, but there's no rugby going on.
Yeah.
Summer holidays, there's no rugby. So like now, like, and yeah, like when I do have to take breaks from training because of injuries, that's
Yeah.
usually when I take breaks. Or what I do unearned breaks.
Okay.
Like an earned break is right after maxing out, you've done a good cycle. Like unearned break,
They're
really
talking
miserable.
about cycles.
I'm horrendously like miserable, but there's no remedy. Like I'm fully aware about that. But,
So, like there is, and this is like a thing I would say, and this is there's a real definite remedy, right? but you have to first weigh up that is this something that needs to be remedied? Because if you're not making a living off weightlifting or getting like really, really competitive in competition style weightlifting or making a living in something associated with weightlifting, like I consider my living to be associated with weightlifting, it's associated with sport. I'm not a professional weightlifter, but I work in weightlifting. If you're not in that bracket, is it that like you can train a lot? The only negative thing is everything that happens outside of training in. So like I'm talking about if you really want to stay training when you probably shouldn't be training, like if you really needed a break and you stay training and it negatively affects your weightlifting, that's a bad thing. And psychologically we need something else there that will give us not the same buzz, but something similar, some sort of mental stimulation. And there's just thousands and thousands of things you can do that will give you that kind of same thing, right? It doesn't have to be exercise related, but it could certainly be exercise related. Like it could be artificial rock climbing indoors. It might be collecting Lego. It might be playing a certain computer game, you know? It's just something, you try for it to be positive when you're doing it. You don't want it to be drinking and going out to sport in the morning. There's a great buzz off that, but it's not necessarily, that would be what we consider maladaptive.
So you just gotta find something.
Is it
Just
like,
have to find something.
like you've got to find something where there's a skill up position?
No, it's just like it's
Because
just
it's-
like
it's
been
like the process.
part of my life since rugby ended.
Yeah.
And like that part of my life, like to me seems irreplaceable. Getting quite deep.
No,
like,
no,
to me it
absolutely.
seems like so irreplaceable. Like it's. I mean, what you're saying really resonates with me. And another further thing I do is like, and it's not deliberate. It's like, so if I'm taking an unearned break from lifting, it's like semi-consciously I can't enjoy other things. Like, so like my other interests outside weightlifting are like the NFL or certain TV shows
Yeah.
or cooking is like, I like, so the NFL like that happens whether I watch it or not. So that I follow that, but like I don't want to eat good food, like nice food. Like I'm like this food tastes good, but I'm not lifting well, so I don't want to and this is a really good TV show, but I don't want to be watching it whilst I'm on. So let's watch really shit TV shows.
Okay.
Like,
That is
so,
deep.
I'm never gonna do that.
No, but that's absolutely fair. Like there's a huge amount of athletes in their life like that. Like, but the problem is, sport can be taken away from you, like with no control. You know, like there can be.
Like you can get hit by a cyclist just
Oh right.
buzzing down at 50 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
You'd be like in the hospital. For
And that's the thing. That's why
like that could happen, and then you
Yeah.
sort of need to be a more
and
well-rounded
like part of
person.
it with me is that like, cause like part of me rationalizing it is like I'm 28, so I know like in everyone's weightlifting prime, like I'm coming towards the end of it, so like I'm just thinking like until I'm 30, I just want to be as focused on weightlifting as possible. Like I know when I'm 35, around that age, I'll just be like, I'm free to enjoy things. I know that
I tell you now, nothing will change when you're 35. People think that happens when you're 30. People think it happens when you're 25. Think it happens when you're 40. It doesn't. Like, unfortunately or fortunately, we're stuck being us forever. Like, I'll talk to my father now. My father is just as mental about sports as he's ever been. Like, doesn't matter he can't play them. He'll still watch them all day long.
That's what I mean. Like it can be something external that's fill that gap. But like right now, it's the weightlifting.
If you might be
Internal,
then
that's
disappointed if your favourite weightlifter is doing shit.
Yeah.
I mean,
You
I'm not
definitely
gonna lie,
be
like,
roaring at the TV
Yeah.
when he's doing
Yeah.
that.
like as a secondary thing, like my mood is very, very attached to my football team. Like it is like bizarre. Like my like, so
Which
like
team
my
is that?
the Buffalo Bills.
Oh okay.
So like my partner, like because we had a really devastating loss at the end of the season. Like she was devastated for like one day. That affected me for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Like it also made my lifting a bit shit. And I was like, I don't want to watch any good shows. I don't want to eat. Like so that. But like usually it's really the weightlifting thing. But like, yeah, maybe when I'm 30,
would-
like, that will be what is.
Yeah, I
But,
really.
but that's external. I don't control that. So like I don't like feel shit like that I affected that. Like but like with like me being injured, like I feel shit because that directly applies to me.
Yeah, I'd really start playing around with a few other things. And play around with things that you're really bad at and need a lot of skill to get at. So like if it's like cooking or something, I'd certainly go and do like a class or take like an online thing where you're being really challenged. Most of the time, if we have a fairly high level of efficacy and we know a lot about something, very difficult for us to sidestep and go in to a crocheting class and be terrible at it. Like, oh Jesus, I'm like top 10% here and don't even know what crochet thing is here, you know. Like, I could use a better example. Like, there's loads of things you can do that will take that cognitive load, and you'll get that little, like those nicotinic receptors in your brain will get that buzz from it. You just need to find it.
Just gotta force it.
Force it 100%.
You just need to find something that your
You have to
at
feel
skill
like it
acquisition.
force you in some way.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, it would be great if your mother was still there and your mother brought you by the hand and she's like, you're playing football today, and they leave you there for an hour and a half. Like, that's a great thing about that is, like, you don't get a choice, you get exposed to all these things, and most of us get exposed to those things you don't like, and then through that, or through some other thing of our own volition, we find these things, and these things are weightlifting, these things are shooting, whatever they are. Like, you just need to go and kind of go out there, and what I'd say in terms of being a better competitive athlete, you'd be far, far better off as a competitive athlete if you had something else that was there.
Okay.
Like, if there was something else in your brain that was
So like, what I was doing basically the wrong thing,
There's
like
gonna be-
causing all my enjoyment.
100%.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you negatively affect your weightlifting. The whole thing you want to do is positively affect your weightlifting. You know, you really want, just find, like, I say find something else that's the easiest thing in the world. Like, I've spent the last 7 years trying to find something that will give me the buzz of tackling someone well, you know. It's very, very difficult to find, but just go and do it. And doing different things that you're terrible at and need more skills at can be class. It might be like learning a language, it might be reading a different genre of whatever you're reading, but like, just going in and find something will take some of that load off weightlifting or the sport you're playing, and then allow you to actually free up some of that like emotional capital from there and get it from someplace else. Because weightlifting's hard enough. Like, it really is hard enough to make progress without having that load on it as well.
There's a lot of opportunity within cooking. I know you were talking about massive amount, more than what at the minute you'll probably be cooking within just a few sets of skills, and then you just try and learn to cook French things and do like those perfect techniques.
Yeah, so
Make
I think
potato-
it helps to like,
make
so I don't know, like, gonna compete something and then couldn't lift, so I didn't compete anymore.
No,
try and make a souffle.
So like,
Yeah, honestly, try and just.
my partner was like, I thought we were gonna compete some this weekend, but no, let's not do that. And got back into the gym and like, okay, let's make some cookie dough, which we did like the other week.
Yeah, no, I definitely be looking outside, because this sport is hard enough. Like, every sport, to be honest, be good at it is hard enough. You don't need to have these other variables stacking on top of it. Like, it would be like, oh, my friends are only my friends if I play sport with them, or my girlfriend only likes me because I'm class at lifting, you know. That's not, you really don't want that to be true, even if it is true. You don't, even if it is true, you don't want to know it.
Why do you think we've all been sent here?
Yeah. So no, that is like, if there's a couple of things you're taking away from this, that's really something I'd like you to take away of, like, this sport and acquiring this set of skills is very difficult, and we don't necessarily want to put other pressures on it. So don't make your living off weightlifting. Okay, next thing I want to talk about, this is kind of what we'll probably finish up on, is motor imagery, motor learning, and how viewing something or observing something multiple times can really affect us. When you're a baby, right, you'll commonly see like a baby reaching out and it's like looking at his hand. They'll be like looking at his hand touching something, or like looking at his hand coming into his face, and be fucking mesmerized by it. Like, so what that's happening there is like an optical nerve going back into your brain. You also have afferent nerves on every single square centimeter of your skin that send back signals, right? You've Golgi apparatus in your muscles and in your tendons. You've muscle spindles that will tell you what length your muscle is. So if I put my hand up here, I know my hand is up here because of afferent nerve signals. If I put my hand back here, I know how many fingers I'm holding up because of afferent nerve signals, right? You can classically know people who are, you've heard the story of people where these nerves get degraded, and they suddenly their hand will just start raising up. They have no idea they're doing it, and they have to look at their hand to be able to bring their hand back down. They have to look at their feet to be able to walk. So a lot of how we learn is by visually observing things, whether it's the baby reaching out and being like, this is this far away, and then it knows when it goes to pick something up the next time, it's that far away. This is a really, really important thing. So what's happening there is when a child observes itself doing something or observes something else doing something, you're getting activation of a system called mirror neurons. So in our brain is something that looks like jelly and goes from the consistency of jelly all the way through to the consistency of cartilage, depending on where it is, right? In the brain, we have millions of neurons. These are the ends of every nerve, right? So we have neurons that are controlling and sending little messages down along our central nervous system out to our peripheral nervous system. It's just basically a wire, and you have a little signaler at the top of the wire. Next to every one of those, you have something called a mirror neuron. Mirror neuron relates directly to the visual system, and how they found this out is they had a load of monkeys with the tops of their heads cut off, and they had electrodes in their brains, and they were seeing what happens to these kind of ghost neurons or these alternative neurons when the monkeys were doing different tasks. Right? So you see these weird kind of spikes in motor neuron activity, like motor neurons are things that control our muscles. You see these weird spikes, and they couldn't really understand it. One day at lunch in the monkey lab, they were feeding the other monkeys, and they started seeing, like, fuck, we've the wrong system connected to the wrong computer, because the monkeys who are eating the bananas, the monkeys who are just watching and not eating, are getting the exact same spike in motor neuron activity as the ones who are doing it themselves. So it turns out, if I'm watching you lift, so for this weekend, I've done thousands of reps of snatches by observing you lifting. Each one of those mirror neurons, it's so efficient if the technique is good. Each one of those neurons, so for me to do a snatch, say there's 10,000 motor neurons fired. When I watch you doing a snatch, 10,000 mirror neurons fire. This is how we end up learning so much. We talk about like animals learning through like watching their mothers teach them things, or like a lioness will be showing them things. It looks like they're actually teaching them. They're just ensuring that they see the movement that's going on. They see the actions that they've been doing. And when we talk about coaching and using this, we call it action observation. So action observation will be me standing in front of you being like, you're observing an action, and I'm hoping that you get some sort of visual cue from that. Your mirror neurons fire and you open your hips really fast, you know? It's the same way when I say, like, get tall at the top of your jerk dip. That action observation actually has an effect in your brain.
So this is the same thing with like audio cues. So like if I hear someone shouting like, get the fuck up, like,
yeah,
the same as you going.
Yeah, so this is the thing, right? Audio cues require you to have a cognitive function, and then you don't get that same mirror neuron activation. What happens when you visually observe something is these things happen. Like if you watch someone putting their hand up constantly, you'll never have to think about that. You'll just have that activation pathway constantly. If you think, like, if someone tells you, like, think about putting your hand up, you'll then have to think about that over and over and over again. So that's why when you're doing any mental imagery piece or trying to get your technique to be better, it's always better to have action observation going hand in hand with that. That's why what really the shift in, like, I know you all love modern sports psychology, shift in modern sports psychology is only action observation, mental imagery or motor imagery. It's the combination of these two things, a combination of you having, we're getting a bit into weeds on this day, but a motor imagery script, and then you observing an action at the same time. So before you go to an international competition, if you're to work with a sports psych, you'll do a lot of mental imagery work. This will have a huge benefit in terms of motor learning, but also in terms of limiting anxieties and things like that. When you're doing the motor imagery and mental imagery stuff, you want to have action observation alongside.
Is it therefore better than to watch athletes of your like anatomy?
Joe, we always say this, right? Find somebody who looks like you, try and lift like them.
Lift like you, yeah.
It is better. But what I really like is if you're using some sort of mental imagery piece to fix something in particular.
Find someone who does that thing well.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
don't
like,
watch the room, but
yeah. Don't fucking do that anyway.
Watch your fellow Eugene.
But this is what I'll say all the time is like,
I've been watching Toshiki.
yeah, have you?
Actually,
And you spot like this?
no, actually, right, the idea of me bringing my feet closer was
Yeah.
me watching Toshiki, and I was like kind of trying to figure out a way to fix like my, because my feet was too wide for my feet.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know whether I should bring it out or I should bring my feet closer. And I saw Toshiki doing like his feet is like really close together, so I just started trying it.
Yeah.
And my proportions are very similar to this. So.
Yeah, so it is. It certainly works well. It works very well. Like another example is like Anton Plesnoy. Anton Plesnoy really cuts his pull short. He pulls himself like a motherfucker under the bar. So like if I'm using mental imagery, you can only train a certain amount of times. You can only train 15 times a week in weightlifting before you die, or like 10 times a week in weightlifting before you die. You can do mental imagery training till the birds come home, or the cows come home. You can literally sit there in your room for hours being like this, doing thousands of snatches.
Do you think there's a point where it's like detrimental? Like
detrimental to your personal life.
Sorry, I'm thinking.
There's a paper by Brown, right? If you want to look it up, and it's optimal mental imagery training, and it uses stuff similar to weightlifting and similar kind of skills, like relatively close skills. 20 minutes, well, it's like 16 to 22 minutes, but 20 minutes of mental imagery training a couple of times a week is very effective. And it's the same thing of cognitive load, it's the same thing of stress load. You don't want to constantly be doing it. You want to be fresh when you're doing it. Quick 20 minutes, mental imagery piece. If you're trying to fix something in your snatch, have a good video example of it, watch the video example of it, think about yourself doing it. Imagine everything. Mental imagery is all encompassing. It's the smells, the sounds. It's not just you watching a 2D screen. You should imagine it through your own eyes. You should imagine yourself in the room. Imagine the barbells and the plates that will be there. Everything should be as vivid as possible when you're doing it. But it's a really, really strong tool. Very, very effective. Not as good as Tadasnol, but like it's okay, any questions?
Actually, just a quick question about like Toshiki specifically.
Yeah.
Like what like with his technique, right? Is there anything that I shouldn't learn from? Like, is that
I think he's a bit too externally rotated, and it works really well for him. I think if you saw a lot of people, like he's not an ideal case, you know. He's pulling like this. He does a lot of things as the bar comes into his hip, like rolling the bar into himself a small bit. It's not ideal, and a lot of that comes from this.
It's got quite low hips and starting position, because that's where I got.
Yeah, he has tiny legs though.
Yeah.
That's why his squat looks so nice. He's really nice. But if I was you, one thing I wouldn't bring in is being that externally rotated. I prefer it to just be a bit straighter, a bit more quad dominant. It will help you with your pull a lot. I think that'll definitely be a positive.
So if I was coaching someone,
yeah,
and they're mid-lift or squat over, the visual cues kind of better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's differing results and differing studies on this, but some people definitely react to visual things versus verbal things, kinesthetic things versus, so kinesthetic would be the feeling of something. Kinesthetic cues, some people just favor certain things. What I tend to do is I go verbal cue, visual cue, kinesthetic cue. So if somebody's bending their arms, I'll say stop bending your arms. If I've said that a couple of times, they don't stop bending their arms, I'll go over and I'll say arms straight, and then try and get them to keep their arms straight. If it doesn't work after a certain amount of time, I'll get a timber stick and I'll stand behind them and I'll just whack them on the elbow every time they bend their elbows.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to do. Run through it constantly, you know. That's very effective. Very rarely bend their elbows after that. But that's.
What are you saying about the visual cue being not cognitive? And
Yeah.
that's really an advantage, right?
Massive advantage.
So would you not just start with that?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
But it's easier to shout at
Yeah.
someone. Particularly if they're at the other end of the room. Like you could do it in a match, or like you could do it at a competition or something. You could say, you know, and they'll get that, you know. And there's loads and loads of subconscious things that will happen when somebody observes an action. If we were to walk in and myself and Gareth go like this, on the first day, everybody else will probably stand around like this. You know, and just not really talk to anyone. If you know for a fact if you walk into a class or a coaching environment and you're like, oh, it's the exact same thing. It's activation mirror neurons, and you'll walk into the room and that activation pathway will happen and you'll say, yeah, maybe I should be more upright. You've no conscious effort in doing that. You're just doing it, and other people will emulate it straight away.
I actually do that consciously a little bit though, because like if someone's like standing up straight, it's almost a cue for me because I have a tendency to snap.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I do
yeah.
do it consciously as well. But
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
But it works. If you've ever done like negotiation training or sales training, mirroring works so well. If I walk in and I'm trying to sell you a chair and you're sitting like this, the first thing I'll do is I'll start being like this, you know? And then you might lean back, and I'll just lean back a few seconds later.
Yeah.
And if I know I want you to be in a certain position at the end, if I know I want you to be leaning back and in like a submissive position at the end, I'll just start leaning back after a few minutes. Then you'll probably lean back because you've subconsciously picked up on the fact that I'm mirroring you. And then you go, okay, so that's great. You know, when you lean in at the end. Or if you want someone to be quite combative because you want a certain thing from them, just as you get towards the end of the conversation, once you know they're picking up on something, you'll just fold your arms and put your elbows on the table, or you'll stop making eye contact with them, you know. Mirroring works so well. It's just weird and people don't like when you talk about it. Wait.
Will it backfire if someone knows that you're doing it?
Only other psychopaths will notice.
Well, I mean, you just got to be subtle, I guess.
Yeah.
But they'll probably be
Oh,
trying
yeah,
to
you don't wanna
You
do it.
raise their arm, you raise their arm.
Sometimes my partner will tell me about like the sales training they have to do. So I find that comparatively, like academics are quite, or at least the ones I'm with, they're extremely blunt, and like to the point of everything I've done with partner, it's just like, my God, that's so rude.
Yeah.
Like and then he's talking about like sales training, and I'm like, but if I notice you doing that, like playing silly buggers with me, I'd immediately shift my.
See, the thing is, you do a few little test runs.
Right, well, to see whether it works on them or not.
You just take your pen and you put your pen on the table, and then you just wait. If that pen isn't on the table in a few seconds, you have to go back to mirroring again.
Okay. Alright.
It's
You have to get it right.
takes a bit of time. Yeah, you mess it up a lot. But like,
But academics aren't notorious for their social finesse.
We're very social, but we just talk to each other in a very specific way.
Yeah, each other in the circle.
Exclusively
Honestly,
social.
this is
Yeah, yeah.
legit a problem that I've had where I'll say something and my family or like my partner will be like, what the Jesus fuck? Why are you saying that? I'm like, I didn't mean anything.
Yeah,
Because I thought about wasting myself.
just told you're bad at your job.
Mom, you're not holding up to scratch lately.
But like,
It's just, it comes down to like efficiency and communication, doesn't it? Like when width and fiction, it's just like 2-word answers and you do 15 things.
Yeah.
Because I know what those things are, like left, right, and then there's no
Do it.
pattern there.
Yeah.
That sort of thing is just efficiency of information when you're in high stress environments. Get your point across.
Absolutely, yeah. Do you have any more questions?
It's a general psychology question, like, not just for weightlifting, but for like sport. Because I've seen your video on the mirror thing. That's a very general thing that applies. Just so it's not even a question, but I just know what are your thoughts, like mirrors and lifting, but music and lifting. Is that like your general thoughts, like thinking about
Music is great. It's like this. The way when I talk about that spectrum of arousal, music is great. It's a really
the
good way.
dependency thing, like.
Dependencies can be developed, but like you don't need to like use it as a tool when you need it, you know. I've like a playlist called Milligrams and Kilograms that happens very, very rarely, and that playlist goes on, and when that playlist goes on, things are getting heavy, you know. Like very, very, it's like Gurf and caffeine. Gurf doesn't drink caffeine from one end of the year to the other. If he's going for a big session, he'll have a cup of coffee, you know.
Exactly like that.
And that's, you use it the same way. I think people do become a bit, you just become, it's not that it's a bad thing, you become desensitized or dependent on it, but it becomes less effective the more you use it.
Because the only thing I'm conscious of, before, so my lifting journey, I lifted for rugby, so I wasn't dependent on lifting.
Yeah.
And then I lifted recreational powerlifting, but I never planned to compete because I didn't give two shits about that. So but then now in weightlifting, if I do plan to compete, which is something I do want to do in the future, there's no music in competition, so.
Well, I wouldn't worry about it in that sense.
Okay.
Because you have headphones on you until you walk the platform. I definitely wouldn't worry about becoming dependent on it. I just worry about that it loses its effectiveness. It's like you're at a fake poker table, but you don't get those chips when you get to leave the poker table, you know? Like, I wouldn't be overly worried. I just wouldn't go to the well too often.
Okay.
I like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it always works, like.
Yeah.
So, because what I currently do is all accessories I listen to music with. But the main lifts, if it's not like too varied or complex, if it's not like a really weird complex, if it's either the main lift or it's like doubles or triples, if it's quite close to it, quite specific. Like music all throughout my warm up sets, working stuff, I take the earphones off. Right. But if I've got your like, I've got your approval to like keep the music on for the working sets, I'll happily do that. I'm just worried about like.
Just worry about like what you're getting from it, Joe. If it's just enjoyable, if you're listening to Kylie Rae Jepsen, you're just tipping along and you're having a great time.
It makes my working sets better than they already are. It's just like, I mean, if I could listen to music in a competition setting, I would probably listen to music in a competition.
Yeah.
If I had the choice to.
Because there's a big difference to learning to or listening to screaming, roaring, heavy stuff, or like certain stuff that's very emotional, like for you. Big difference between listening to that every day versus listening to whatever.
Yeah.
You know, top 50. Top 50 stuff isn't going to have much of an effect. If you're finding it's distracting you and you're concentrating more on that, then take it.
Would having earphones like affect your proprioception?
It'll affect your inner ear, so for your balance, they'll definitely.
I find it because I work overhead, I always take them off.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you can wear it for powerlifting because you move so slowly, you know. But
I'll probably go for weightlifting.
What's that?
I could probably go for weightlifting then.
Yeah. Yeah, you actually could wear it for a lot of your cleans. But it would be better if you didn't like. It'd be better if you didn't wear them for the lifts themselves because there's so much thinking going on.
Yeah.
I like it for squats and heavy pulls. So, or if you really need to, like in your case, if you fail 3 cleans because you're too slow and too passive, you might need to go into the box for a while and then go from there. It's just the two. It's like this. It's like smelling salts. It's like anything else. Like getting slapped in the back before you walk in a platform.
Like those luxuries are there for a competition. Like you are allowed to smell smelling salts. You're allowed to.
Yeah.
But you're not allowed to go.
For your liver, headphones before you go in.
But not like during.
No. There's so much going on the platform as you dress the bar. If you don't.
You're not hyped up when there's like the whole room is
I was
watching.
about to say, if you don't have a physiological reaction to that,
Then
you
you're
won't be
weird.
excited for it. You'll be on the platform. Particularly if you trained a long time for it and it's an important competition to you, you'll get there.
Yeah.
But that's what I was saying, most of the time in competition, we're pulling the dial back. You're making sure some of this is under control there.
Yeah, so we're waxing on Monday afternoon, maybe I would put some earphones on. I don't know, who knows, but maybe.
Yeah. See it. Like, it's not the Olympics either, you know. Like, if that max out goes poorly, then you have 3 weeks' time and you get to max it again. You know, like, it's not a massive, like, A/B tests and things a few times, like, and see how it goes. Sweet.
Come one more.
Yeah.
I've got like a mental block on snatch in particular.
Yeah.
Just a long time ago, I like dropped a PB right in my head.
Yeah.
Quite dramatically. It was a great video.
Oh.
But like ever since then, like 100 kilos just like
Gets in your
it
head.
just gets in my head.
So what I would do is, so like, is 95 okay?
95 okay. Yeah. I even hit 102 because that wasn't 100.
Oh.
But 100.
Yeah.
Just that.
Yeah.
Just.
I mean, I've only hit 102 once.
So this happens really commonly, right? Where people will be like, oh, first thing there's red plates in the bar, or 100 kilos, or first thing there's blue plates in the bar, whatever it is. They'll get obsessed with a number. And we'll get this from people emailing us being like, oh, at week 6 of the program, you expect me to do this number for this amount of reps. Of course we do. We're 6 weeks into a training program.
Yeah.
You have to. So what you do then is, this is my 5th time mentioning momentum today. You pull back, you pick a weight you know you're going to hit every time. 90 kilos, 95 kilos. You start from going 90 kilos once a week to twice a week, 3, 4, 5, until you're at the point where you're hitting 90 kilo singles or doubles multiple times per week, really consistently with good technique. Just keep that going until it's basically unavoidable. You're like, fucking hell, it's only 90 kilos. And just creep up with it again. Oftentimes we get something in our head, we need to burst past it and we want to get past it straight away. You don't need to burst past it and get past it straight away. Like, weightlifting is so little about that extra kilo or two. It's about perfecting that motor pattern, building that momentum, and then just peaking for it.
Yeah.
If it's a competition, you peak the arousal and you get some other things going, that will get you past it. But For training, for long-term progression, you don't. You build momentum slowly. You sneak up in it, and you get to that weight until it's inevitable.
Yeah. Cool.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Few more questions? We're around for the next.